Steam rose from the copper pots in Maylin's kitchen like spirits dancing in the autumn evening, carrying with it the comforting aroma of ginger and star anise. Through the small window of her modest restaurant in Shadow Harbour, the port city's famous fog rolled in from the sea, transforming familiar shapes into mysterious silhouettes. To most passers-by, she was simply the quiet woman who had opened the Golden Lotus 6 months ago, known for her remarkable dumplings and mysterious smile. None of them would have guessed that those hands that so deftly wielded cleavers and shaped delicate dim sum had once diffused bombs in Bangkok or picked locks in Berlin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The evening crowd had thinned, leaving only Mr. Chen, the elderly dockworker who came every Thursday for her beef noodle soup, and a table of 3 strangers who had arrived just before closing. Something about them had triggered old instincts. The way they carried themselves, how their eyes moved constantly, scanning exits and angles. Most telling was how they positioned themselves, one facing the front door, one with a clear view of the kitchen, and one watching the back entrance. May continued her practiced movements, each gesture precise and economical, just as they had been in her previous life. The knife in her hands moved with fluid grace, transforming green onions into perfect uniform circles. 10 years ago, she had used similar precision for very different purposes. Now, at 42, she had thought those days were behind her. The bell above the door chimed as 2 more men entered, their heavy boots tracking mud across her clean floor. The first group tensed almost imperceptibly. Territorial response, trained muscle memory, not common thugs then, professional, dangerous. Kitchens closed, May announced quietly, her voice carrying that particular tone of gentle firmness she had cultivated since opening the Golden Lotus. But you're welcome to finish what's been served. The larger of the 2 newcomers, a man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jaw, smiled without warmth. That's all right, sweetheart. We're not here for the food. Mr. Chen looked up from his soup, concerned about creasing his weathered face. May caught his eye and gave him the slightest shake of her head. The old man understood, quietly leaving money on his table and shuffling toward the door. None of the men tried to stop him. Smart old-timer, Scarface said, watching him go. Now, Miss Lin, or should I say Agent Echo, we can have a proper conversation. May's hands didn't pause in their work, though her mind raced through possibilities, calculations, and odds. They knew her old code name, which meant this wasn't random. The 3 who had arrived first were clearly a separate group from these. 2. The tension in the room had shifted with the newcomer's arrival. I think you have me confused with someone else, she replied, her voice maintaining its gentle restaurant owner tone. I'm just a cook. The second newcomer, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expensive watch, pulled out a phone. On its screen was a photograph taken 12 years ago in Macau, a younger version of herself in an evening gown, standing over 2 unconscious men in suits, a stolen microchip visible in her hand. Just a cook? Wire-Rims asked, his cultured British accent incongruous in the small harbour restaurant. I think we both know better. The question is, what's a legendary operative of Section 7 doing running a noodle shop in this backwater? The first group was paying close attention now, their earlier pretense of being customers abandoned. May noticed how their hands had moved closer to concealed weapons, the way they carried themselves, their tactical positioning. Former military, probably special forces, American by their bearing. May set down her knife, wiping her hands carefully. On her apron, a decade ago, she would have already calculated 16 ways to neutralize everyone in the room. Now, she felt the weight of her new life, the regular customers who trusted her food, the local children who called her auntie, the small community that had accepted her without questions. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. That person doesn't exist anymore. Scarface laughed, the sound like gravel in a blender. See, that's where you're wrong. People like us, we don't get to just walk away. Especially not when we know. What you know? The Hanoi incident, Wire Rims added, his voice dropping lower. You were there, you saw everything. And now, certain parties are very interested in what you witnessed. The Hanoi incident, of course, the mission that had changed everything, that had made her walk away from the life she'd known. The truth about what had really happened that night had been buried so deep that even Section 7 didn't know the full story. Only 3 people knew the truth, and 2 of them were supposedly dead. The 3 Americans shifted subtly, their attention now split between May and the 2 newcomers. Their leader, a man with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of a career soldier, spoke for the first time. "Stand down, McTavish," he said to Wire Rims. "This doesn't concern MI6. On the contrary, Colonel Hayes, Wire Rims, McTavish, replied smoothly. Miss Lin's intel about Hanoi could compromise operations across 3 continents. My employers have a vested interest." May's fingers brushed the underside of her cutting board, feeling the reassuring presence of what was hidden there. Some habits die hard, and maintaining escape routes and emergency measures was one she'd never abandoned. But using them would mean the end of everything she'd built here. The fog outside had grown thicker, transforming the street into a ghostly landscape of shadows and muted light. A distant ship's horn sounded, mournful and low, like a warning. Through her window, May could see the neon sign of her restaurant reflecting off the mist, the Golden Lotus, her dream of a simpler life, of peace. "There's nothing to tell," she said finally, her voice taking on an edge that didn't belong to the quiet cook she'd become. "Hanoi is buried. Let it stay that way." 5 people died that night, Colonel Hayes counted. Good people. And the official record is a lie. 6 people died, May corrected softly. Your intel is incomplete. The atmosphere in the small restaurant grew heavier, charged with unspoken threats and old secrets. Outside, the fog continued to roll in from the sea, as if nature itself was trying to blur the lines between past and present, between the woman she had been and the one she had chosen to become. McTavish took a step forward, his cultured facade cracking slightly. "The Hanoi files are being declassified in 72 hours. When that happens, a lot of questions will be asked. Questions that only you can answer. And we need those answers first," Scarface added, his hand moving toward his jacket. May's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in every detail of the scene before her. The positions of each man, the weapons they carried, the way the evening light fell across her kitchen. She had worked so hard to leave that life behind, to build something real, something honest. But as she stood in her quiet kitchen, surrounded by people from the shadows she'd tried to escape, she realized that sometimes the past doesn't let go so easily. The kitchen timer dinged, an incongruously normal sound in the tension-filled room. Without taking her eyes off the men, May reached over and silenced it. The scent of perfectly cooked xiaolongbao filled the air, a reminder of the simple life she had chosen. "My dumplings are getting cold," she said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that none of her regular customers would have recognized. "And I have a feeling this is going to be a very long night." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his movement deliberate and measured. "You always did have a talent for understatement, Echo. Remember Belgrade?" "That was another lifetime," May replied, though her mind flashed to a rain-soaked night, a high-stakes chase across slick rooftops, and a decision that had saved Hayes's life. She hadn't known he was American back then, hadn't known much, except that letting him die would have meant crossing a line she wasn't willing to cross. "A lifetime you can't just erase," McTavish interjected, "particularly not with something as mundane as..." He glanced around the restaurant with barely concealed disdain. Dim sum. Scarface's hand was still hovering near his jacket, but May noticed how the three American operatives had subtly adjusted their positions. They weren't just watching her now. They were covering each other's blind spots against McTavish and his partner. The complex choreography of professionals who trusted no one. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement in the fog. Mr. Chen was still out there, watching. The old man who had been her first customer, who had welcomed her to Shadow Harbor with stories about his grandchildren and suggestions for authentic local ingredients. He had no idea who she really was, but his concern was genuine. That was what she had found here. Real connections, honest relationships untainted by deception and hidden agendas. "You know what your problem is, McTavish," she said, reaching for a clean towel to dry her hands. "You think this is mundane because you've never created anything real in your life. Only destroyed." Her eyes met his. "How's that working out for you?" The barb hit home. She saw it in the slight tightening around his eyes. But before he could respond, a new sound cut through the tension, the cheerful bells of old Mrs. Wong's food cart as she made her evening rounds outside. The normalcy of it struck May like a physical blow. This was what she was protecting, not just her own peaceful existence, but the delicate web of community that had welcomed her. The evening regulars who would arrive soon for their usual orders, the children who pressed their faces against her window to watch her fold dumplings, the local vendors who saved their best ingredients for her. She looked at the men surrounding her, professionals like she had once been, all of them trapped in a world of shadows and secrets. They saw her quiet life as a surrender, a step down from the high-stakes world they inhabited. They couldn't understand that it had taken more courage to build this small, honest life than any of her past missions had required. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The Hanoi Files," she said finally, her voice taking on the crisp tone she hadn't used in a decade, "aren't what you think they are. The truth about that night." She paused, weighing decades of ingrained secrecy against the need to protect what she had built. "The truth would start a war none of you are prepared for. That's not your call to make anymore," Scarface growled, but Hayes held up a hand, silencing him. "What kind of war?" the colonel asked, his professional facade cracking. Just enough to show genuine concern. Before May could answer, the restaurant's front door swung open. The fog rolled in like a living thing, and with it came a figure she hadn't seen in 12 years, a woman in an elegant business suit, her silver hair swept back in a severe bun, moving with the deadly grace of a coiled snake. "The kind of war," said Assistant Director Victoria Chen of Section 7, "that we've been trying to prevent for the past 12 years. Her cold eyes swept the room. "Stand down, gentlemen, all of you. This situation has just been classified above your pay grade." May's hand tightened on her kitchen towel. Victoria had been her handler, her mentor, and ultimately the reason she had walked away from everything. The woman knew the full truth about Hanoi, because she had been there too. The sixth casualty that no one knew about, it had been Victoria's own sister, and that was just the beginning of the secrets that had died in Hanoi that night. The fog continued to roll in, thick and insistent, as if trying to blur the boundaries between May's carefully constructed present and the shadows of her past. In her small kitchen, surrounded by the tools of her new life and the ghosts of her old one, she realized that the time for hiding was over. "Hello, Victoria," she said softly, her voice carrying all the weight of their shared history. "I was wondering when you'd show up." The night was indeed going to be very long, and by its end, nothing in Shadow Harbor would ever be quite the same. Victoria Chen's presence seemed to draw all the warmth from the Golden Lotus's cozy interior, even the steam from May's cooking. Pots dissipated more quickly, as if retreating from the assistant director's Arctic demeanor. McTavish and Scarface exchanged glances, their earlier bravado dimming in the face of real authority. "Gentlemen," Victoria said, her crisp voice cutting through the tension, "I trust you understand the concept of plausible deniability." It wasn't a question. She moved further into the restaurant, her Louboutin heels clicking against the worn, wooden floor, an incongruous sound in the modest establishment. "Your presence here tonight never happened. Your agencies will be notified through appropriate channels." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his military bearing a sharp contrast to Victoria's corporate polish. "With all due respect, Assistant Director, my team has orders directly from—" "Your orders," Victoria interrupted, "are based on incomplete intelligence, a dangerous position for anyone. Wouldn't you agree, Echo?" May had begun methodically wiping down her cooking station, a habit that helped her think. The familiar motions grounded her in the present, even as the past threatened to overwhelm it. "Using that name won't change anything, Victoria. I meant what I said. I'm done." Through the fog-shrouded window, old Mrs. Wong's food cart was still visible, its cheery lanterns creating halos in the mist. The elderly vendor was chatting with Mr. Chen, both of them casting worried glances toward the Golden Lotus. They were probably debating whether to call Officer Zhang, the local beat cop, who enjoyed May's spicy wonton soup every Wednesday. "The world doesn't stop needing people like us just because we decide to retire," Victoria said, her eyes tracking May's movements. "Especially not when we're the only ones who know the truth." Scarface snorted. "Truth? In our line of work?" Quiet. Victoria's command cracked like a whip, making the large man flinch despite himself. She turned back to May. "The seals are breaking, all of them. Not just Hanoi. Everything we contained that night is coming undone." May's hands stilled on her cutting board. "Impossible. We made sure." "Things change. People talk. Pieces get moved on the board." Victoria's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "Sophie's sacrifice was supposed to buy us more time." The name hung in the air like smoke. Sophie Chen, Victoria's younger sister, the 6th casualty that night in Hanoi. The official record listed her as collateral damage. In a failed operation, the truth was far more complex and far more terrible. McTavish cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt this cryptic reunion, but my superiors—" "Your superiors," Victoria cut in, "are scrambling to understand fragments of a puzzle they can't possibly comprehend. Tell me, Mr. McTavish, have you wondered why the Hanoi files are being declassified now, after 12 years of absolute blackout?" The British operative adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a nervous tell that May noted automatically. "Internal review procedures. Someone is pulling strings." Colonel Hayes interrupted, his weathered face grave. "Multiple agencies, multiple countries all suddenly deciding to unveil this particular skeleton. It's coordinated." A distant foghorn sounded, its mournful note seeming to underscore the colonel's words. In the kitchen, one of May's pots began to boil over. She moved to adjust it, her movements deliberate and measured, buying time to think. "The seals," she said finally, keeping her voice low. "You're talking about the data packets?" Victoria nodded. "All 7 of them. The ones we scattered across different networks, different agencies, the ones that, when combined, would reveal what really happened that night," May finished. "Who was really behind it all?" The Americans shifted uneasily, clearly frustrated at being out of the loop. McTavish looked like he wanted to interject again, but Scarface grabbed his arm, shaking his head slightly. Whatever was being discussed was clearly above their level of clearance. "It wasn't just about the biological weapon, was it?" Hayes asked, quietly. My team, we always knew something didn't add up about that mission. The target facility was supposed to be a rogue operation, but the security protocols, the personnel. He trailed off, decades of military experience finally connecting the dots. It was sanctioned, high level. Higher than you can imagine, Victoria confirmed. And if the truth comes out now, with current global tensions, what they are, she let the implication hang in the air. May moved to her small office behind the kitchen, keenly aware of every eye following her. The room was sparse, a desk, a filing cabinet, and a single photograph of the harbour at sunset. She pulled open the bottom drawer, removed a false bottom, and extracted a small red notebook. The seventh seal, Victoria breathed, recognizing the item. You kept it. Insurance, May replied simply, though I hoped never to need it. The notebook contained no obvious data, just recipes, written in May's precise handwriting. But between the lines, encoded in a cipher that only 3 people in the world could read, was the final piece of the Hanoi puzzle. The piece that would either prevent a catastrophe or trigger one, depending on how it was used. Outside, the fog had grown thick enough to obscure the street completely. Old Mrs. Wong and Mr. Chen had disappeared into the gloom, though May could still hear the faint jingle of the food cart's bells. The sound seemed to come from another world entirely, the simple, honest world she had built for herself, now teetering on the edge of collapse. If someone is gathering the seals, she said, turning back to face the room, they must have access to multiple intelligence agencies, resources, influence. And a grudge, Victoria added. Don't forget the grudge. Colonel Hayes frowned. Against who? Everyone who was there that night, May answered, her mind racing through implications. Everyone who helped bury the truth, including... A sudden crash from the back alley interrupted her. In an instant, the professional instincts of everyone in the room kicked in. Hayes and his men moved to defensive positions, while McTavish and Scarface drew weapons. Victoria simply stepped to one side, presenting a smaller target while maintaining sightlines to both entrances. May reached under her cutting board, retrieving the ceramic knife she kept there, undetectable by standard weapons scanners, balanced perfectly for throwing. Some habits never died. The back door burst open, revealing a figure that made May's blood run cold. Dr. Marcus Way, the leading biological weapons expert in Asia, stood framed in the doorway. His left arm ended in a cybernetic prosthetic, a souvenir from the Hanoi incident. "Hello, Echo," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Or should I call you May? Such a quaint name for a killer." Behind him, more figures emerged from the fog. Professionals, heavily armed, moving with military precision. The kind of team you assembled when failure wasn't an option. "I've spent 12 years planning this reunion," Dr. Way continued, his cybernetic hand flexing with a soft whir. "Tracking down the seals, positioning my pieces, waiting for the perfect moment." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "And now, thanks to Assistant Director Chen's predictable protective instincts, I have everyone I need in one place." May's grip tightened on her knife as she calculated angles, distances, probabilities. The quiet life she had built in Shadow Harbor suddenly felt like a dream, dissolving in the face of a nightmare she thought she had left behind. Through the kitchen window, she caught a glimpse of movement. Officer Zhang had arrived, likely summoned by Mr. Chen's concern. The young policeman had no idea he was walking into a situation that could reshape global politics. "Officer Zhang," Dr. Wei called out, his voice carrying a false warmth that made May's skin crawl. "I wouldn't come any closer if I were you, miss. Lin's restaurant is closed for a private party." Zhang's footsteps halted outside. Through the fog, May could see his silhouette, hand moving toward his service weapon. He was a good cop, dedicated to protecting his community. He was also completely out of his depth. "Everything all right in there, Miss Lin?" Zhang called out, his voice steady despite his obvious tension. Before May could respond, Victoria stepped in smoothly. "Everything's fine, officer. Just a late business meeting. Perhaps you could help ensure we're not disturbed." She flashed what appeared to be official government credentials, though May knew Victoria carried at least 6 different sets of identification at any given time. Zhang hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll keep an eye on the perimeter." "Elegant as always, Victoria," Dr. Wei commented as Zhang's footsteps retreated, "still manipulating people like chess pieces. Tell me, does it ever get tiring, playing everyone around you?" "Not as tiring as nursing a grudge for 12 years, Victoria replied coolly. "The cybernetic arm suits you, Marcus, a physical manifestation of what you've become, part human, part machine, all weapon." May watched the exchange carefully, noting how Wei's operatives had taken up positions covering every exit. They were professionals, yes, but there was something off about their formation. They were positioned more to keep people in than to defend against external threats. This wasn't just about capturing them, it was about containing something. "The weapon you tried to destroy," Dr. Wei said, his artificial hand clenching. "The breakthrough that could have revolutionized human enhancement. Did you ever tell your protégé the truth, Victoria, about what Sophie really discovered in that lab?" A muscle twitches in Victoria's jaw, the smallest tell, but one that spoke volumes to those who knew her. Sophie discovered that some lines shouldn't be crossed, that some knowledge comes at too high a price. "And knowledge is neutral," Wei countered. "It's the application that matters. Your sister understood that. She saw the potential in my work, the possibility of improving humanity itself. Until you turned her against me." May's mind raced back to that night in Hanoi. The laboratory is hidden beneath layers of security, the test subjects in their glass chambers, their bodies transformed by Wei's improvements. And Sophie, brilliant young Sophie, realizing too late what her research was being used for. The red notebook seemed to burn in May's pocket. Within its encoded pages lay the truth. Not just about the weapon, but about the shadow organization that had funded Wei's research. The same organization that now seemed to be orchestrating the declassification of the Hanoi files. 12 years, May said softly, drawing Wei's attention. 12 years to gather the seals, position your allies, set up this moment, but you made one miscalculation. Wei's eyebrow arched. "Oh? And what's that? You think I'm still the same operative who helped shut down your project, the one who follows protocols and plays by agency rules?" She allowed herself a small smile. "But I'm not Agent Echo anymore. I'm just a cook, and a cook's kitchen." Her hand moved slightly, brushing against the industrial gas valve behind her. "Is full of surprises." Colonel Hayes caught her meaning first, his eyes widening slightly. He shifted his weight, preparing to move. His team responded instinctively, adjusting their positions without drawing attention. "The truth about Hanoi," Wei said, stepping further into the restaurant. "About what we discovered in that facility. About why Sophie Chen really died, about who authorized it all. It's going to come out. The world deserves to know what was stolen from them, what could have been." "The world deserves peace," May replied quietly. "Something you never understood." Wei's artificial hand whirred as he raised it, a hidden compartment opening to reveal a built-in weapon. "Peace is stagnation. Evolution requires conflict. And now, thanks to all of you being here," his cold smile widened, "I can demonstrate exactly what my research achieved." A faint hissing sound filled the air, not from May's gas valve, but from Wei's operatives. Their tactical gear was releasing some kind of vapor, and their eyes had begun to glow with an unnatural light. "You didn't just recover the research," Victoria breathed, realization dawning. "You continued it. These men—" are the next stage of human evolution, Wei finished proudly. And after tonight, after the truth about Hanoi is revealed, governments will be lining up to fund my work. All it will cost is a few loose ends. His gaze fixed on May, starting with a quiet cook who knows too much. The unnatural glow in the enhanced operative's eyes cast an eerie blue tinge across the golden lotus's interior. Steam still rose from May's cooking pots, mixing with the strange vapor emanating from Wei's soldiers to create ghostly swirls in the air. The familiar sense of ginger and star anise now mingled with something metallic and sharp, the smell of weaponized chemistry. May's hand never left the gas valve as she watched Wei's enhanced operatives move into position. Their movements were too smooth, too precise, like watching a dance performed by machines wearing human skin. Through the fog-shrouded windows, Officer Zhang's silhouette was barely visible, unaware that he was standing guard over a powder keg. Fascinating, isn't it? Wei's voice carried a professor's enthusiasm as he gestured toward his soldiers. Targeted genetic modification, enhanced neural pathways, accelerated reaction times, everything we dreamed of in Hanoi, perfected over 12 years of research. Perfected? Victoria's tone dripped with skepticism. They look more like puppets than super soldiers, says the woman who spent her career pulling strings. Wei flexed his cybernetic arm, the mechanisms whirring softly. At least my modifications are honest about what they are. The first attack came without warning. One of Wei's enhanced operatives launched himself at Hayes's team with impossible speed, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. But the colonel hadn't survived 20 years of black ops by being slow. He pivoted, using the attacker's momentum to send him crashing into a table. The restaurant erupted into chaos. McTavish and Scarface opened fire, their shots precise and professional, but the enhanced soldiers moved like liquid shadow, dodging bullets that should have found their marks. Victoria pulled 2 slim blades from her elegant suit jacket, her movements economical and deadly as she engaged the nearest threat. May had approximately 3 seconds before the fighting reached her kitchen. She used them well. In one fluid motion, she turned the gas valve, grabbed her ceramic knife and flipped her heavy wok off the burner. The scalding cooking oil inside sprayed across 2 advancing operatives. Enhanced reflexes or not, boiling oil demanded respect. They staggered back, their synchronized movements faltering for the first time. The kitchen? Wei laughed, staying back from the melee. That's your tactical advantage? You'd be surprised, May replied softly, reaching for her rack of cooking implements. A chef's kitchen is just an arsenal waiting to happen. She demonstrated by launching a handful of chopsticks with precise force. The wooden implements might not be lethal, but striking pressure points was pressure points, whether you used tactical batons or kitchen tools. One of Wei's men dropped, his enhanced nervous system overloaded by the precise strikes. Hayes and his team had adapted quickly to their superhuman opponents, using teamwork and experience to compensate for the enhancement gap. They moved like a well-oiled machine, covering each other's blind spots, creating crossfire situations that even enhanced reflexes couldn't easily escape. Your soldiers might be faster, Hayes called out, ducking under a blindingly fast punch, but they fight like novices. All that enhancement can't replace actual combat experience. Wei's face darkened. Then perhaps a demonstration of their other capabilities is in order. He made a sharp gesture, and his remaining operatives suddenly shifted tactics. The strange vapor surrounding them intensified, and their movements became even more fluid, more inhuman. One of them literally ran up a wall to gain a better attack position. Neural density augmentation, Wei explained, almost proudly. The ability to process spatial relationships in 4 dimensions. They're not just faster, they can see possibilities you can't even imagine. To demonstrate, one of the enhanced soldiers engaged Victoria in what looked like an impossible series. of moves, attacking from angles that shouldn't have existed. The former Section 7 assistant director found herself forced back, her extensive training barely keeping her ahead of the otherworldly assault. May had seen enough. These weren't just enhanced soldiers. They were proof that Wei had taken his research far beyond anything they'd discovered in Hanoi. The implications were staggering and terrifying. She moved through her kitchen with practiced efficiency, gathering ingredients with the same precision she'd once used to assemble weapons. Fish sauce, dried chilies, citric acid, industrial cleaning supplies. In the hands of someone who understood chemistry as well as cooking, the combinations could be interesting. "You always did like to improvise, Echo," Wei called out, noticing her preparations. "But this isn't like Bangalore or that mess in Macau. My soldiers can adapt to any situation, predict any move." His monologue cut off as May's first improvised chemical cocktail hit one of his operatives. The mixture of mundane cooking ingredients created a reaction that temporarily overwhelmed even enhanced senses. The soldier staggered, his supernatural grace failing as his augmented nervous system struggled to process the overload. "Predict that," May muttered, already preparing her next surprise. The battle had transformed her beloved restaurant into a war zone. Tables were overturned, plates shattered, and the air was thick with various vapors and the sharp tang of gunpowder. But May moved through the chaos like a dancer, every step calculated, every motion serving multiple purposes. A pressure cooker became an improvised flashbang. Metal serving trays deflected attacks with precision timing. Even her collection of spices found weaponized purpose, creating clouds that confused enhanced visual processing. "Enough!" Wei's voice cut through the chaos. He raised his cybernetic arm, and a panel opened to reveal something that made Victoria curse in 3 languages. "Is that," McTavish started to ask. "A miniaturized version of the Hanoi prototype," Wei confirmed. "Perfectly scaled for urban deployment. Want to see what it does to unenhanced humans? Officer Zhang is still outside, isn't he?" May's blood ran cold. She knew exactly what that weapon could do, had seen its effects in the Hanoi facility, the test subjects, their bodies, and minds warped by forces they couldn't comprehend. Sophie's face when she realized what her research had been used to create. "This was your play all along," Victoria realized, her voice tight. "The declassified files, gathering us here. You want witnesses, credible witnesses to demonstrate your weapon's effectiveness," Wei smiled, the expression empty of everything except scientific fascination. "The world needs to see that evolution can be guided, accelerated. Sometimes progress requires a push." His artificial hand began to glow with an unsettling blue light. And what better push than turning a quiet harbor town into ground zero for the next stage of human development? The weapon began to power up with a high-pitched whine. Wei's enhanced soldiers moved to form a perimeter, their movements now completely synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. Through the windows, May could see more figures emerging from the fog, normal humans drawn by the commotion, potential test subjects for Wei's twisted vision. Time slowed as May processed options, possibilities, consequences. She had spent 6 months building a life here, becoming part of this community. She had regular customers who trusted her, neighbors who smiled and waved, children who called her auntie. She had found peace in the simple act of creating food that brought joy to others. Now, watching Wei prepare to transform her adopted home into a testing ground for his enhanced soldier program, she realized that sometimes protecting peace required a willingness to shatter it yourself. Her hand moved to the red notebook in her pocket, the 7th seal containing not just information about the original weapon, but something else. Something even Victoria didn't know about, something Sophie had entrusted to her in those final moments in Hanoi. "Marcus," she said softly, using his first name for the first time since that night, "you really should have checked what I was cooking before you started this fight." In her pots, ignored during the battle, certain ingredients had been simmering, combining, creating something that would prove that sometimes the quietest weapons were the most effective. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the one with the most obvious power. It was the one who had spent 12 years planning for exactly this moment. Wei's enhanced soldiers suddenly tensed, their augmented senses detecting something their modified nervous systems couldn't quite process. The strange vapor surrounding them began to react, with the aromatic compounds filling the air from May's simmering pots. "What did you do?" Wei demanded, his scientific certainty showing its first crack. "What's in those pots?" "You know what Sophie's real breakthrough was in Hanoi?" May asked quietly, her hands moving in practiced motions as she continued her preparation. Not the enhancement formula, not the neural modifications. It was something simpler, something you overlooked because you were too focused on making soldiers stronger. Victoria's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The counteragent, Sophie, wasn't trying to perfect the enhancement process. She was developing a way to reverse it, May confirmed. A fail-safe, in case the power she helped create ever fell into the wrong hands. Her eyes met Wei's. "Like yours." The enhanced soldiers were starting to show signs of distress, their perfectly synchronized movements becoming erratic. The vapor, emanating from their tactical gear, was changing color, reacting with the complex mixture of herbs, spices, and other ingredients May had been carefully combining throughout her day of cooking. "Impossible," Wei snarled, though his face showed the first signs of genuine fear. "We destroyed all of Sophie's research when you killed her." May's voice carried an edge sharper than any knife in her kitchen. "You should have checked her pockets first. The formula wasn't in any computer, any file. It was written in a letter, a recipe, actually, one final message to her sister." Victoria pulled a small, worn envelope from her suit jacket. "My last birthday card. From her, the one she gave me the morning before." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Sophie always did love her codes. The recipe for Mother's special tea looked so innocent. Colonel Hayes and his team had taken defensive positions, recognizing that something significant was unfolding. McTavish and Scarface pressed themselves against the walls, trying to stay clear of the increasingly unstable chemical reaction filling the air. "The enhancement process works by creating artificial neural pathways," May explained, her voice taking on the same teaching tone she used when showing local children how to fold dumplings. "Complex chemical chains that override natural limitations. But every chain has a weak link. Every recipe can be adjusted." One of the enhanced soldiers stumbled, his supernatural grace deserting him. Another clutched his head, the unnatural glow in his eyes flickering like a dying light bulb. The vapor around them was turning from ethereal blue to a dull, muddy brown. "You weaponized cooking ingredients," Wei realized, genuine amazement breaking through his anger. "Turned my own soldiers' enhanced senses against them. That's why you chose this life, this cover. It wasn't about hiding. You were preparing. I told you a chef's kitchen is just an arsenal waiting to happen." May reached for a final container, this one filled with a clear liquid that smelled of nothing at all. "But you want to know the real irony? Every ingredient I used tonight is completely harmless to unmodified humans. Sophie made sure of that. Her counteragent only affects artificially enhanced tissue." She uncapped the container. "Like, for instance, cybernetic interfaces." Wei's artificial arm began to twitch, the sophisticated neural connections being disrupted by the complex chemical cocktail filling the air. His weapon's ominous whine became uneven, stuttering like a failing engine. "You can't do this," he growled, trying to stabilize his arm with his natural hand. 12 years of work, the next stage of human evolution. I won't let you." "Evolution," May's quiet voice cut through his protests. Look at your soldiers, Marcus. Look what you've turned them into. That's not evolution. It's enslavement. You're so focused on making humans better that you forgot what makes us human in the first place. As if to emphasize her point, more figures appeared in the fog outside. Not more enhanced soldiers, but townspeople. Mr. Chen had gathered a group of locals, regular people armed with whatever they could find, coming to help the quiet cook, who had become part of their community. You see weapons and test subjects, May continued, her voice carrying the weight of conviction. I see neighbors, friends, people who chose to trust each other, to help each other, to be better through choice rather than chemistry. The enhanced soldiers were on their knees now, their superhuman abilities unraveling as Sophie's counteragent did its work. The complex neural modifications that made them nearly invincible were breaking down, leaving confused, disoriented men. In their wake, Wei made one last desperate move, lunging toward May with his failing cybernetic arm extended like a claw. But his movements, once calculated and precise, were now clumsy, uncoordinated. May sidestepped with the same grace she used to navigate her busy kitchen during dinner rush, and Wei crashed into her cooking station. Sophie understood something. You never did, May said, watching as Wei's cybernetic enhancement continued to fail. True strength isn't about being faster, stronger, or smarter than everyone else. It's about knowing when to use the power you have and when to let it go. She turned to Victoria, who was already moving to secure Wei as he struggled with his malfunctioning arm. The seventh seal isn't just about what happened in Hanoi. It's about what Sophie created to make sure it never happened again. A failsafe built into the very chemistry of the enhancement process. She was always the smartest one in the family, Victoria said softly, her usual Ice Queen demeanor cracking to show genuine grief. She knew the price of power better than any of us. Outside, Officer Zhang had finally realized something was seriously wrong. He was organizing the gathered townspeople, establishing a perimeter, protecting his community the way normal humans had always done, by working together. It's over, Marcus, May said, watching as the last traces of enhancement vapor dissipated into the fog. The classified files can come out now. The world can know the truth about Hanoi, about what you tried to create and how Sophie stopped you. Not with a weapon, but with a recipe. Hayes approached, his weapon trained on Wei. Ma'am, we should get him and his men secured before the counteragent wears off. It won't wear off, May replied. That's the beauty of Sophie's design. Once the artificial neural pathways are broken, they can't be re-established. The human brain is remarkably good at healing itself, at returning to its natural state. She met Wei's defeated gaze. Evolution works best when you don't try to force it. As if to punctuate her words, the kitchen timer dinged once again. May allowed herself a small smile as she moved to check her dumplings, still perfectly cooking despite the chaos around them. Some things, after all, required patience rather than enhancement. Through the settling fog, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the harbor in gentle colors. The Golden Lotus's dining room was a disaster of overturned tables and broken dishes, but the kitchen, May's true domain, remained largely intact. Already she could smell the subtle blend of spices and herbs that had helped save Shadow. Harbor from becoming ground zero for Wei's twisted vision of progress. You know, she said, beginning to clean her cooking station with the same precision she'd used to deploy Sophie's counter-agent. I still have customers expecting breakfast. In a few hours. Anyone want to help me straighten up? The simple, ordinary question seemed to break the last of the tension. Victoria actually laughed, while Hayes and his team began writing tables with military efficiency. Even McTavish and Scarface pitched in gathering broken dishes while carefully avoiding the remaining puddles of enhanced soldier vapor. Mr. Chen poked his head through the door, taking in the scene with remarkable composure. Everything all right, Miss Lin? May looked around her restaurant at the defeated would-be supervillain, the neutralized enhanced soldiers, the gathering of international operatives now engaged in impromptu cleanup duty, and the subtle traces of a world-changing counter-agent mixed with the aroma of perfectly cooked dumplings. "Just a small problem with some unsatisfied customers," she replied with a gentle smile, "but I think we've worked it out." The old man nodded sagely, as if this explained everything. "Good." Mrs. Wong was worried about her morning dumplings. "Tell her they'll be ready on time," May assured him. "Some things are too important to let a little international incident interfere with." As the sun rose over Shadow Harbor, Mei Lin, former spy, current cook, and protector of both culinary arts and human nature, began preparing for another day of serving her community. After all, the best recipes, like the best lives, were the ones that didn't need enhancement to be extraordinary. Dawn painted Shadow Harbor in watercolor hues as local authorities arrived to handle the aftermath. Wei and his de-enhanced soldiers had been quietly transported away in unmarked vehicles, their destination known only to those with the highest clearance levels. The Golden Lotus's dining room still bore scars from the confrontation, but May's kitchen hummed with renewed purpose as she prepared the morning's offerings. "You're actually going to open for breakfast?" Hayes asked, watching her skillfully fold dumplings with the same hands that had just helped prevent a global catastrophe. "After everything that happened?" "Routine maintenance cover," Victoria answered, automatically, then caught herself with a small frown. "Though I suppose that's not your primary concern anymore, is it?" May continued her precise movements, each fold perfect, each motion economical. "Mrs. Wong's grandson is coming home from university today. She always gets his favorite breakfast here before picking him up from the ferry." She looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze. Some promises matter more than international incidents. The morning fog was thinning, revealing knots of curious onlookers being gently dispersed by Officer Zhang. The young policeman had demonstrated remarkable adaptability, smoothly incorporating the official cover story, a failed robbery attempt quickly contained. In Shadow Harbor, it seemed, even law enforcement understood the value of comfortable fiction over uncomfortable truth. McTavish cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "About the Hanoi files will be properly redacted," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Certain details about Sophie's research, particularly regarding the counter-agent, need to remain classified." Her expression softened slightly. "For her protection." "Her protection?" Scarface scoffed. "The woman's been dead for 12 years. Has she?" The quiet question came from May, her hands never pausing in their work. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked just for a moment. "You knew." "I suspected." May began filling dumplings with practiced efficiency. "The letter with the recipe, it was written after the official time of death. And Sophie was always too clever to not have a backup plan." Colonel Hayes straightened. Years of tactical experience clicking new pieces into place. The 6th casualty that night. The body was never fully identified. "DNA confirmed," McTavish began. "DNA can be fooled," Victoria cut in, "if you have access to the right resources and motivation." She moved to the kitchen window, staring out at the harbor where fishing boats were beginning their morning dance. "My sister knew too much, had seen too much. The official story of her death protected her better than any witness protection program." May reached for fresh ginger, her knife moving with practiced precision. "And now, with Wei's capture and the enhancement program exposed, now things get complicated." Victoria turned back to the room, her professional mask firmly back in place. Wei wasn't working alone. His research had backers, powerful ones, the kind that don't appreciate their investments being disrupted. The Declassification of the Hanoi files wasn't just about exposing the truth, Hayes mused. It was about smoking out everyone involved, both sides of the operation. A sound from the back alley caused everyone to tense, but it was just Mr. Chen delivering fresh vegetables for the morning prep. The elderly man nodded to May through the kitchen window, seemingly unfazed by the lingering signs of combat in her restaurant. "Your vegetables, Miss Lin," he called out, "and my wife wants to know if you need help cleaning up. She's good with stubborn stains." May's lips curved in a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Tell her I've handled it." As the old man shuffled away, McTavish shook his head in amazement. "How do you do it? Switch so seamlessly between—" He gestured vaguely at the aftermath of combat. "This and everyday life?" "Practice," May replied simply. Then, after a thoughtful pause, "and perspective. In our line of work, we're trained to see every situation as a potential threat, every person as an asset or obstacle. But sometimes—" She gestured to her kitchen, to the morning sunlight streaming through windows that had witnessed both violence and peace. "Sometimes a restaurant is just a restaurant, and that's worth protecting too." Victoria watched her former protégé with new understanding. "You're not maintaining cover at all, are you? This isn't a front or a hiding place. This is actually your life now, parts of it." Mai began preparing the day's first batch of bao, the rhythmic motion of kneading dough, as natural as breathing. The skills don't go away. The awareness, the training, the ability to turn everyday objects into weapons if needed. But they don't have to define every moment, Hayes nodded slowly. It's not about switching between two lives. It's about finding a way to live one life honestly. "Speaking of honesty," McTavish interjected, "we still have a situation. Wei's backers will want revenge. They'll come looking." "Let them look," May replied calmly. "Shadow Harbor is more prepared than they might expect." She moved to a shelf, lined with jars of dried herbs and spices, each meticulously labeled in her precise handwriting. Sophie's counter-agent wasn't just about neutralizing the enhancement formula. It was about creating something sustainable, something that could be maintained by ordinary people using ordinary ingredients. Victoria's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The recipe, you've been teaching it to people without them even knowing." "Mrs. Wang's special tea blend," May confirmed. "Mr. Chen's preservation techniques for his vegetables. Even the aromatherapy mixtures the local herbalist sells. Small pieces of a larger protection woven into the community's daily life." "You turned the whole town into a defense system," Hayes said with professional admiration. "Not through weapons or training, but through cooking," May finished. "Through sharing knowledge that seems simple on the surface but carries deeper purpose, just like Sophie taught me." She opened her red notebook, the seventh seal, revealing pages of recipes written in multiple hands. Some were Sophie's original formulas, others were May's adaptations, and still others were contributions from the people of Shadow Harbor, each adding their own cultural techniques to the growing collection. "This is why you chose this place," Victoria realized. A port town where recipes and ingredients from different cultures mix naturally, where people are used to adapting, to incorporating new elements into their traditions. May nodded. Sophie understood that the best way to protect something isn't to lock it away, but to hide it in plain sight, to make it part of everyday life, so natural that even those using it don't realize its true significance. The morning sun had fully risen now, turning the harbor's waters to liquid gold. The first regular customers would be arriving soon, seeking their usual breakfast comfort. None of them would know that their favorite cooking aromas were part of an elaborate defense system, or that their trusted neighborhood cook had spent the night preventing a global catastrophe. "We should go," Hayes said, recognizing the returning rhythm of normal life. "Our presence here will only draw attention." Victoria lingered, watching May continue her preparations. Sophie would be proud, you know, of what you've built here. I know. May's hands moved steadily, creating order from chaos, one dumpling at a time. She told me herself last New Year's. The tea shop in Vancouver is doing well, by the way. The former assistant director of Section 7 allowed herself a real smile. Of course it is. We Chen women have a talent for reinvention. As the others filed out, blending into the awakening town with practiced ease, May caught a glimpse of her reflection in the kitchen window. The quiet cook of Shadow Harbour looked back at her, hands dusted with flour, apron slightly askew. But beneath that simple image, like subtle spices in a complex dish, other truths waited to be discovered by those who knew how to look. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Wong entered, right on schedule, ready to pick up breakfast for her returning grandson. May greeted her with a warm smile, already reaching for the special order she had prepared despite the night's interruptions. Some promises, after all, were worth keeping, even if they came wrapped in secrets as delicate as dumpling skin and as complex as international espionage. As Mrs. Wong settled at her usual table with her grandson's favorite breakfast, McTavish returned alone, his MI6 training evident in how quietly he materialized at the kitchen entrance. "One last question," he said softly. "The counteragent formula spread through recipes across town. What happens if someone analyzes it? Tries to reverse engineer Sophie's work?" May continued her morning preparations, but her eyes held a knowing glint. "Did you know that every great chef has a secret ingredient, something that makes their signature dish impossible to perfectly replicate?" "The formula changes," Victoria answered from behind McTavish, making him start slightly. She hadn't left after all. "Each recipe is different, adapted to local ingredients, cultural techniques. Even if someone identified one version, they'd only have a piece of the puzzle," May confirmed. "Like trying to understand an ocean by analyzing a single drop of water." McTavish absorbed this, his analytical mind processing implications. "And Wei's backers, when they realize their enhanced soldier program is compromised, they'll do what powerful people always do," Victoria said, her tone carrying years of experience with international intrigue. "They'll try to adapt, to find a way around it. But Sophie's work," she smiled slightly, "it's elegant in its simplicity. The more they try to enhance human capabilities, the more vulnerable they become to ordinary countermeasures." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows through the Golden Lotus's windows. Outside, Shadow Harbour was fully awake now, its streets filling with the normal bustle of a working port town. Fishermen called out their fresh catches, shopkeepers arranged their displays, and children hurried to school, their backpacks bouncing. "There's something else," McTavish said, his voice dropping even lower. "Something about the way Wei's soldiers moved at the end, before the counteragent took full effect. They weren't just enhanced individuals, they were networked somehow, sharing a collective consciousness." May's hands stilled on her rolling pin. "You noticed that too?" "Hard not to, when you've spent years studying hive mind theory for Queen and country." He adjusted his glasses. Wei wasn't just trying to create better soldiers, he was trying to create a unified fighting force, linked through their enhancements. "A network," Victoria mused, "that could be controlled from a single point, or hijacked by someone with the right access." The implications hung in the air like steam from May's cooking pots. An army of enhanced soldiers, their minds linked, controlled by whoever held the master key. It would explain the level of backing Wei had received, the resources devoted to his research. The counter-agent didn't just neutralize their physical enhancements, May said quietly. It restored their individual autonomy, their human nature. She moved to a shelf filled with traditional Chinese medicines, selecting specific jars with practiced care. These are more than preventative measures. They're a reminder that human consciousness isn't meant to be standardized or controlled. Every person's body chemistry is unique. Their response is individual, a defense system that works because of human diversity, not in spite of it, McTavish realized. Brilliant. The door chimed again as Mr. Chen returned, this time accompanying his wife, who carried cleaning supplies. The elderly couple moved through the restaurant with quiet efficiency, erasing evidence of the night's violence without comment or question. Your theory about Wei's networked soldiers, May said to McTavish as she watched the Chens work. It explains something that's been bothering me. The timing of the Hanoi files declassification, the coordination between different agencies. She met Victoria's eyes. Someone was testing the waters, weren't they? Seeing if a synchronized operation was possible on a global scale. Victoria's expression hardened. Using existing intelligence agencies as a proof of concept. If they could coordinate the declassification across multiple countries, multiple security levels, then the same networks could be used to deploy enhanced operative cells worldwide, McTavish finished. Each one linked, controlled, perfectly synchronized. But they didn't account for Sophie, May said, a note of pride entering her voice, or for the power of individual choice. She opened a cabinet, revealing rows of small packages, each carefully labeled with cooking instructions in multiple languages. These go out with every takeaway order, every catering job. Simple recipes, traditional techniques, each one carrying a piece of the protection. And each recipient adds their own variations, their own cultural interpretation, creating a web of diversity that makes standardized control impossible. Victoria understood. The more they try to impose uniformity, the more variation they create, May confirmed. Sophie called it the paradox of enforced evolution. The harder you try to control human development, the more it naturally resists. Mrs. Chen approached the kitchen, her weathered face showing no sign that she found anything unusual about the intense discussion. Miss Lin, the dining room is ready, though that scorch mark on the ceiling. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Some soda water might help. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Mee reached for a jar of her special cleaning solution, another delivery system for Sophie's protective agents. I'll take care of it. As the elderly woman returned to her work, McTavish shook his head in amazement. They really don't know what they're part of, do they? Any of them? They know what matters, May replied. They know their community looks after its own. They know that traditions are worth preserving, that some things can't be rushed or forced. She began preparing the day's first batch of tea, the aromatic steam carrying subtle traces of Sophie's genius. The rest is just details. Victoria watched the morning light play across the harbour's waters, her tactical mind processing new layers of understanding. Wei's backers will figure it out eventually. They'll realize that their perfect network of enhanced soldiers is being unraveled by nothing more complex than people living their normal lives, cooking their traditional foods, sharing their cultural heritage. And when will they do? McTavish asked. When they do, May said calmly, they'll face the same choice Wei did. Try to force their vision of progress onto a world that naturally resists it, or... She gestured to the awakening town outside, to the mix of cultures and traditions that made Shadow Harbor unique. Learn to appreciate the power of organic growth, of natural connections formed by choice rather than control. The morning's first regular customers were beginning to arrive, drawn by the familiar sense of comfort and community. Mr. Chen had resumed his usual post near the door, greeting people with the same gentle dignity he'd shown while helping clean up after a covert operation. His wife's humming blended with the sound of May's cooking preparations, creating a symphony of ordinary life that was, in its way, the strongest defense against those who would try to remake humanity in their own image. I should report in, McTavish said finally. My superiors will want to know. Tell them what they need to hear, Victoria advised. That Wei's operation has been neutralized, that his research was fundamentally flawed. The rest... She glanced at May, who was already focused on preparing her next round of dumplings. The rest is best left to quiet hands and careful hearts. The MI6 agent slipped away. Victoria lingered a moment longer. You've built something remarkable here, Echo. Something even I didn't fully understand until now. We all did, May corrected gently. Sophie with her science, you with your strategies, even Wei in his misguided way. We all contributed to this moment, this understanding of what really makes humanity strong. She handed Victoria a small package, similar to the ones she gave her regular customers. Your sister's favorite, she said softly, for the next time you see her in Vancouver. Victoria accepted the package with a nod, understanding all that remained unspoken. As she left the Golden Lotus, she paused to watch the morning sun illuminate the restaurant sign, the golden characters seeming to shimmer with hidden significance. Inside, Mei-Lin continued her work, her quiet dedication to both cooking and protection flowing together in a seamless dance. The scars of the night's battle were fading, replaced by the warmth of another ordinary day in Shadow Harbor. A day made extraordinary by the silent guardians who understood that sometimes the best way to change the world was to help it stay, exactly as it should be. 3 days after Wei's capture, Shadow Harbor's routine had almost returned to normal. Almost. To the casual observer, the Golden Lotus operated as it always had, serving comfort and sustenance to its loyal customers. But May noticed the subtle changes, the way Officer Zhang's patrols passed by more frequently, how Mr. Chen's morning vegetable deliveries now included careful observations of street activity, the increased chatter among the fishing boats about, unusual vessels in the harbor. The first sign of real trouble came during the afternoon lull, when a sleek corporate woman in a Chanel suit entered the restaurant. Her pearl necklace probably cost more than May's monthly rent, but it was her eyes that caught the former operative's attention. Sharp, calculating, and completely at odds with her carefully crafted appearance. Miss Lin? The woman's accent was pure Manhattan private school. I represent Nexus Dynamics. We're interested in acquiring your property, May continued, slicing ginger, each stroke precise and measured. The Golden Lotus isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, the woman replied smoothly, placing a business card on the counter. It's just a matter of finding the right price. She opened her designer briefcase, removing a document folder. We're prepared to offer... No. May's knife came down with slightly more force than necessary, splitting a ginger root cleanly in half. The corporate woman's polite smile never wavered. Miss Lin, perhaps you don't understand. Nexus Dynamics has already acquired most of the properties along this street. Your restaurant is becoming an inconvenience. Through the window, May spotted 2 men in expensive suits taking photos of the building's exterior. Their shoulder holsters were visible when they raised their phones. Amateur work, or intentionally obvious intimidation. I understand perfectly, May replied, her quiet voice carrying an edge. Please thank Nexus Dynamics for their interest, and do remind them that property records are public. Someone might notice if too many local businesses change hands simultaneously. The woman's smile turned predatory. Interesting. Our research suggested you were just a simple cook, yet you seem quite informed about corporate acquisition strategies. Before May could respond, the kitchen door burst open. Mrs. Wong rushed in, her usually cheerful face tight with worry. Miss Lin, the harbour master, they're trying to arrest him. Some nonsense about improper permits. May's eyes narrowed slightly. The harbour master, Mr. Tanaka, was meticulous about his paperwork. More importantly, he was the one who had implemented Her suggested modifications to the port's security protocols, incorporating Sophie's protective measures into the harbor's daily operations. "Excuse me," she said to the corporate woman. "It seems I have a lunch rush to prepare for." "Of course." The woman's smile remained fixed as she gathered her documents. "We'll be in touch. Change is coming to Shadow Harbor, Miss Lynn. Best to be on the right side of it." As soon as the woman left, May moved to her office, pulling out the burner phone she'd maintained out of old habit. Victoria answered on the first ring. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," May said without preamble. "Corporate front, targeted harassment, systematic disruption of community leadership." "Nexus dynamics," Victoria replied, unsurprised. "One of Wei's primary backers. They're trying to destabilize the protection network by breaking up the community. Mr. Tanaka already handled. Our friends in immigration are smoothing things over. But this is just the beginning." Through her kitchen window, May watched. The corporate suits continue their photography, now joined by what appeared to be a building inspector. All of them moved with the too precise coordination she recognized from Wei's enhanced soldiers. They've adapted the program, she realized. Found a way to mask the enhancement signatures from Sophie's counter-agent. "Precisely." Victoria's voice carried a note of professional admiration. "Instead of obvious military applications, they're using subtle enhancements. Improved cognitive processing, synchronized team dynamics, enhanced persuasion capabilities. Perfect for corporate takeovers and legal maneuvering. Harder to fight than straightforward violence," May mused, already calculating possibilities. "They're learning," Victoria agreed. "The question is, are we?" A commotion outside drew May's attention. The building inspector had gotten into an argument with Mr. Chen, who was refusing to let him access the shared alley between properties. The elderly man's stance was casual, but May recognized the subtle defensive position, something she'd incorporated into the Tai Chi classes she taught at the community center. "They're not just trying to buy us out," May said, watching the confrontation. "They're trying to make the protection network visible by forcing us to defend it. Classic counterintelligence strategy. Force your opponent to reveal their methods. By escalating pressure points." Victoria paused. "The harbour master was just the first. They'll target anyone who helps maintain the network. The herbalist, the tea shop owner, even the local schools where you've introduced traditional cooking classes." May's free hand moved to the red notebook hidden beneath her recipe collection. "We need to adapt the formula. Find a way to detect their subtle enhancements before they can establish a foothold. Sophie's working on it," Victoria confirmed. "But science takes time. Their corporate approach gives them legal cover and public legitimacy. We need to—" She cut off as May's secondary alert system activated, a specific sequence of wind chimes triggered by movement on the roof. Someone was accessing the building through less conventional means. "I have to go," May said quietly. "Company's coming." "Be careful. These aren't Wei's blunt instruments. They're corporate raiders with enhanced capabilities and unlimited resources." "Then, it's fortunate," May replied, moving to her spice rack where certain special blends were kept, "that I have something they'll never understand, a community worth protecting." She ended the call just as the first ceiling panel shifted slightly. Their surveillance must have revealed her daily routine. This was normally her food prep time, when the Golden Lotus was closed between lunch and dinner service. The restaurant would be empty, except for the quiet cook working in her kitchen. May began humming softly as she prepared ingredients, giving no indication that she'd noticed the intruders. Through subtle reflections in her knife blade, she counted at least 3 figures moving with enhanced coordination in the ceiling space. Their movements were completely silent. Impressive tech, but it didn't account for how cooking aromas rose through the ventilation system. The first attacker dropped into her kitchen with liquid grace, moving faster than any normal human could react. But May wasn't normal, and her kitchen wasn't just a kitchen. What followed was a masterclass in close-quarters combat disguised as cooking accidents. A thrown handful of specialty pepper blend, enhanced with Sophie's latest formulation, disrupted the intruder's augmented senses. A splash of supposedly spilled sauce created a treacherous surface, negating their enhanced balance. A heavy wok, wielded with precise force, made a surprisingly effective shield against their synchronized attack pattern. The corporate raiders were good, their enhancements subtle but effective, their tactics sophisticated. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed the Golden Lotus was just a restaurant, and Mei Lin was just a cook. When Officer Zhang responded to reports of a disturbance 10 minutes later, he found Mei calmly preparing the evening's dumplings. 3 unconscious figures, impeccably dressed in tactical gear disguised as business attire, were neatly arranged by the back door. "Cooking accident," Mei explained serenely. "Some people just can't handle their spices." Zhang's expression remained professionally neutral as he called for backup, but Mei caught the slight smile he tried to hide. The young officer had grown up in Shadow Harbor, had eaten her food since she'd opened the Golden Lotus. He knew, as all locals did, that some things were worth protecting, not with violence or enhancement, but with the quiet strength of a community that looked after its own. As police vehicles arrived to collect her unfortunate customers, Mei noticed Mr. Chen directing foot traffic away from the scene, Mrs. Wong's food cart strategically positioned to block curious onlookers, and the harbour master's wife conveniently choosing this moment to organize an impromptu street-cleaning effort. The corporate woman in the Chanel suit observed from across the street, her calculated smile finally showing cracks of frustration. She spoke rapidly into a phone, likely reporting the operation's failure to her enhanced superiors at Nexus Dynamics. Mei returned to her cooking preparations, but her mind was already working on the next evolution of Sophie's formula. The corporate raiders had revealed much about their new enhancement methods, information that could be crucial in adapting their defenses. The battle for Shadow Harbor was escalating, moving from direct confrontation to a more subtle war of influence and control. But as Mei watched her community work together, each person playing their part in protecting their home, she understood something that Wei's backers had never grasped. True strength didn't come from enhancement or coordination. It came from choice, from individuals freely choosing to stand together, to protect what mattered, to resist those who would remake the world through force rather than understanding. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her kitchen, Mei began preparing a new batch of her special dumpling sauce. Tomorrow, it would be distributed to every restaurant in Shadow Harbor's harbor district, carrying with it not just Sophie's protective agents, but something far more powerful, the recipe for resistance. The kitchen door chimed as McTavish slipped in through the back entrance, his MI6 training evident in how he blended seamlessly with the gathering shadows. "Just intercepted some interesting chatter," he said without preamble. "Nexus Dynamics isn't working alone. They've partnered with Global Tech Securities and Mingzhou Enterprises." Mei continued her precise measurements, but her mind raced through implications. The 3 largest private security firms in Asia, Europe, and North America, all of them showing unusual patterns in their corporate acquisitions. Small businesses, local institutions, community gathering places like restaurants, Mei finished. She lifted her eyes to the ceiling, where signs of the earlier combat had already been professionally repaired by Mr. Chen's construction company, a group of former military engineers who had found peace in Shadow Harbor. "They're replicating our network, using enhanced corporate raiders to create their own version of community control." McTavish nodded grimly, but with a crucial difference. Their version isn't based on voluntary participation and cultural heritage. It's about systematic replacement of local leadership with enhanced operatives. Through the window, May watched as the corporate woman from earlier spoke with a group of local business owners. Her enhanced persuasion capabilities were subtle, but effective. Several shopkeepers were nodding along, their expressions worried. They're offering protection, May realized, from the very problems they're creating. Classic corporate takeover strategy, enhanced by Way's research. McTavish adjusted his glasses. The synchronized raids on your restaurant weren't just about elimination. They were gathering data, analyzing your defense methods. A new figure appeared in the doorway, Dr. Sarah Martinez, the local pharmacist who had helped adapt Sophie's formula for medical distribution. Her usually calm demeanor was shaken. They're pushing through new health code regulations, she reported quietly, targeting traditional medicine practices, demanding standardized suppliers for all pharmaceutical and herbal products. May's hands stilled on her cutting board. Cutting off our distribution networks and replacing them with corporate-controlled supply chains, McTavish added. Brilliant, really. They're not just attacking the protection network. They're building their own infrastructure on top of it. The sound of breaking glass outside drew their attention. A group of protesters had appeared, carrying signs about modernization and progress. Their movements were too coordinated, their chants too perfectly synchronized. Enhanced agitators, using public unrest as cover for their corporate master's agenda. Officer Zhang approached the group, but May could see his uncertainty. How do you maintain order when the disorder is legally sanctioned and corporately funded? We need to show them, she said suddenly, an idea forming. Not just the enhanced operatives, but the community members they're trying to influence. They need to see what they're really fighting, Dr. Martinez caught on quickly. A demonstration of what corporate protection really means. More than that. May moved to her spice rack, selecting certain special blends with careful precision. A reminder of what makes Shadow Harbor strong. Not enhancement or coordination, but choice and connection. McTavish watched her work with growing understanding. You're going to trigger their enhancement signatures, force them to reveal themselves, with a recipe they won't expect. May began mixing ingredients, creating something that was part cooking, part chemistry, and part revolution. Sophie's original formula wasn't just about neutralizing enhancement, it was about revealing the truth. She opened her red notebook to a special page, one written in Sophie's own hand during those last desperate moments in Hanoi. The recipe described there wasn't just a counter-agent. It was a catalyst, designed to make the invisible visible. Dr. Martinez, how quickly can you modify your herbal supplements? The pharmacist smiled. For this, I'll work through the night. McTavish will need coverage, something to explain any unusual reactions when the formula takes effect. Leave it to me. Food festival? Cultural celebration? I'll create a plausible public event, May nodded, her quiet confidence spreading to her allies. Mr. Chen's construction crew can handle distribution through their work sites. Mrs. Wong's food cart network will cover the streets. And Officer Zhang will make sure emergency services are prepared, Dr. Martinez finished, without revealing exactly what they're preparing for. Through the window, the enhanced protesters had grown more aggressive, their coordinated movements becoming more obvious as their frustration mounted. The corporate woman watched from her position across the street, her calculated smile now mixed with visible concern as she observed Shadow Harbor's resistance to her influence. They think they're so subtle, McTavish mused. Using enhanced operatives for corporate takeovers, legal manipulation, social engineering, but they've forgotten something crucial. What's that? Dr. Martinez asked. The same thing Wei forgot, May answered quietly, that sometimes the most powerful forces are the quietest ones. A community's traditions, a culture's heritage, a people's choice to stand together. She began packaging her special sauce into containers for distribution, each one carrying a piece of Sophie's legacy. They want to enhance humanity, to control it through chemical and corporate means, but they can't enhance what they don't understand. The afternoon light caught the steam rising from her cooking pots, creating halos that seemed to dance in the air. To most observers, it was just another day of food preparation at the Golden Lotus. But to those who knew where to look, it was the beginning of a revolution. One fought not with violence or enhancement, but with recipes passed down through generations and connections forged through trust. "Tomorrow," May said softly, her quiet voice carrying the weight of certainty, "Shadow Harbor reminds them what real community looks like." As her allies departed to set their plan in motion, May returned to her cooking. Each movement was precise, each ingredient measured with care. But now her simple acts of food preparation carried an additional purpose, preparing her community for the battle ahead. The corporate raiders thought they were fighting for control of a simple port town. They were about to discover that Shadow Harbor's strength wasn't in its strategic location or business potential. It was in the quiet moments between neighbors, the shared meals between friends, and the collective will of people who had chosen to protect their way of life. As night fell over the harbor, lights began to appear in windows across town, homes and businesses signaling their solidarity in ways too subtle for enhanced surveillance to detect. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, Shadow Harbor prepared its response, led by a quiet cook who understood that the most powerful revolutions often started with something as simple as a shared meal and a remembered recipe. Dawn broke over Shadow Harbor with an unseasonable mist, as if the weather itself was conspiring to mask the quiet revolution brewing in the port town's streets. The morning light revealed subtle changes. Holiday lanterns strung between buildings for McTavish's hastily organized Cultural Heritage Festival. Dr. Martinez's pharmacy displaying prominent signs about free health consultations, and Mrs. Wong's food cart fleet positioned at strategic intersections throughout the district. But it was the arrival of the corporate convoy that truly signaled the day's significance. 5 black SUVs rolled into town, their windows tinted beyond legal limits, their movements synchronized with military precision. They parked in a perfect semicircle around the Golden Lotus, disgorging a small army of enhanced executives in tailored suits. May watched their arrival through her kitchen window while completing her morning preparations. Her special sauce had been distributed throughout Shadow Harbor overnight, incorporated into everything from coffee shop beverages to bakery goods. Now it was just a matter of timing. The restaurant's door opened precisely at 6 a.m., admitting Elizabeth Drake, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, and if Victoria's intelligence was correct, the mastermind behind the corporate enhancement program's new direction, Miss Lynn. Drake's voice carried the refined accent of old money and Ivy League education. Unlike her subordinates, she moved with natural grace rather than enhanced coordination. "I hope you'll forgive the early intrusion, but time-sensitive matters require direct attention." May continued her precise knife work, transforming ginger root into perfect uniform slices. "The Golden Lotus doesn't open until 7. "Yes, about that." Drake settled onto a bar stool with casual elegance, placing a thick folder on the counter. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing your establishment's permits, licenses, health inspections. It seems there are some irregularities requiring immediate attention." Through the window, May noticed enhanced corporate agents taking up positions around the block. Their movements were subtle, but their coordination was obvious to trained eyes. They were establishing a perimeter, isolating the Golden Lotus from potential interference. "More concerning," Drake continued, "are certain distribution patterns. We've identified unusual ingredients moving through unofficial channels, unregistered recipe modifications being shared between local businesses." Her smile remained pleasant, but her eyes hardened. One might almost suspect an organized attempt to circumvent proper corporate oversight. May set down her knife, wiping her hands carefully on her apron. "Is there a question in there somewhere, Miss Drake? More of an observation. You've built something remarkable here, Miss Lynn. A protection network disguised as community tradition, elegant, effective." Drake's expression shifted to one of genuine admiration, but ultimately limited by its reliance on voluntary participation. She opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos, transaction records, and detailed maps of Shadow Harbor's business districts. "Our enhanced analytics team has identified every node in your distribution network, every restaurant, every shop, every community center that helps maintain your protective recipes." "You seem very well informed," May replied quietly. "We are." Drake's smile widened fractionally. "Just as we're well informed about Sophie Chen's current location in Vancouver, about Victoria's off-books operations, about Hayes's team's unauthorized activities." She paused meaningfully. "About everything." Outside, the morning mist began to thin, revealing more enhanced corporate agents taking up positions, but May also noticed other movements. Mr. Chen's construction crew performing suspicious amounts of early morning roadwork, Mrs. Wong's expanded fleet of food carts creating careful traffic patterns, Dr. Martinez's pharmacy staff making unusually frequent deliveries. "So here's my proposal," Drake continued, either unaware of or unconcerned by the quiet mobilization happening around her. "Nexus Dynamics acquires the Golden Lotus, legitimately, publicly, with full corporate backing. You stay on as head chef, continuing your special recipes, but under our guidance, our enhancement protocols, our distribution network." She gestured expansively at the growing corporate presence outside. "Instead of protecting one small port in town, you could help us guide humanity's evolution on a global scale. Controlled development, carefully managed enhancement, systematic improvement of human potential." "Through corporate oversight," May observed. "Through professional management," Drake corrected smoothly. "Let's be honest, Miss Lynn. The world is changing. Enhancement technology can't be contained anymore. The only question is who guides that change. Scattered local resistances or organized corporate governance?" A commotion outside drew their attention. One of Drake's enhanced agents had intercepted Officer Zhang, attempting to approach the Golden Lotus. The corporate operative moved with fluid grace, using enhanced capabilities to effortlessly block the young officer's path. "Your community can't fight the future," Drake said softly, "but it can help shape it, under proper supervision, of course." May turned back to her cooking preparations, her movements unhurried. "And if I decline, then we do this the hard way." Drake's pleasant demeanor cooled several degrees. "Our enhanced teams have already secured regulatory approval for complete redevelopment of Shadow Harbor's business district. Health code violations, building safety concerns, licensing irregularities, all carefully documented and legally actionable." She slid several documents across the counter. "By this time tomorrow, every business involved in your distribution network will be shut down pending corporate review. Every person who's helped maintain your protection system will face legal consequences. And this charming little experiment in community resistance will become a case study in failed opposition to progress." Through her kitchen window, May could see the full scope of what she faced. Enhanced corporate agents positioned throughout her neighborhood, legal documents threatening her community's livelihood, and the weight of multinational corporations, ready to crush Shadow Harbor's independence. But she could also see something Drake's enhanced analytics had missed, the subtle signs of a community prepared to stand together, the way locals navigated around corporate agents with practiced ease, the carefully coordinated movements of delivery workers and street vendors, the quiet determination in Officer Zhang's stance as he faced down enhanced opposition. "An interesting proposal," May said finally, reaching for her special blend of morning tea. Would you like something to drink while we discuss details? Drake's smile returned, victory apparently assured. Green tea, if you have it. I find it helps clear the mind for business negotiations. May began her tea preparation with precise, practiced movements. Each step was calculated, each ingredient measured with care. Through the window, she caught glimpses of her neighbors implementing their own preparations. Dr. Martinez's health consultations, distributing modified formulas, Mrs. Wong's food carts serving enhanced recipe breakfasts, Mr. Chen's crew creating strategic access points throughout the district. The moment of truth had arrived. Shadow Harbor's future would be determined not by corporate power or enhanced capabilities, but by the quiet strength of a community that had chosen to resist together. As she poured the tea, May allowed herself a small smile. Drake thought she was negotiating a corporate takeover. She was about to discover that some traditions couldn't be bought, some communities couldn't be controlled, and some cooks couldn't be corrupted. The revolution would begin with a simple cup of tea served by a quiet cook who had learned that the strongest weapons were often the most subtle ones. Drake lifted the cup with practiced elegance, inhaling the aromatic steam. Interesting blend, something local. A family recipe, May replied, watching carefully. Passed down through generations. How charmingly traditional. Drake took a measured sip, then paused, her enhanced corporate instincts sensing something beneath the subtle flavors. This is Sophie's original formula, May confirmed quietly. Not the diluted version we've been distributing, but the pure compound, the one you've been trying to replicate in your corporate labs. Drake's eyes widened fractionally as the tea's effects began to take hold. Around them, through the windows, her enhanced corporate agents showed the first signs of distress. The precisely coordinated perimeter began to waver as Sophie's formula worked its way through their systems. Impossible, Drake managed, her carefully maintained poise cracking. Our enhancement protocols are genetically coded. They can't be neutralized by simple cooking. May's voice remained gentle, but carried an edge of steel. That's what Wei never understood either. The power of tradition isn't in its complexity, but in its ability to adapt, to be passed down, to evolve naturally. Through the dispersing morning mist, Shadow Harbor's true defense network became visible. Dr. Martinez's patients were distributing modified herbs and medicines throughout the crowd. Mrs. Wong's food carts had created a web of protective influence through their strategic positioning. Even Mr. Chen's construction crew had been laying down more than new pavement. They'd been establishing chemical barriers that were now activating. Your enhanced analytics missed something crucial, May continued, watching Drake struggle with the formula's effects. They tracked our distribution networks, our business connections, our supply chains, but they couldn't quantify the community, couldn't measure loyalty, couldn't calculate the strength of freely chosen bonds. Drake's hand trembled as she set down the teacup. Outside, her corporate agents were facing a similar crisis. Their enhanced coordination was failing, leaving them confused and disoriented as years of chemical conditioning began to unravel. You don't understand what you're doing, Drake warned, her corporate polish giving way to genuine alarm. The enhancement program isn't just about control, it's about survival, humanity's next step. Without guided evolution, without corporate oversight, without forcing change on those who haven't chosen it, May interrupted softly. She moved to her kitchen window, gesturing at the scene unfolding outside. Look at what real evolution looks like. Shadow Harbor's residents had emerged in force, not with weapons or violence, but with food and medicine and community support. Officer Zhang coordinated with local shopkeepers to help confused corporate agents. Dr. Martinez's team provided medical assistance to those experiencing withdrawal from enhancement chemicals. Even Mrs. Wong was there, offering warm congee and gentle understanding to people who minutes ago had been the enemy. "Your enhanced operatives are welcome to stay," May said, turning back to Drake, "to experience what it means to be part of a community rather than a corporate network, to choose their own path rather than follow programmed protocols. And if they choose to maintain their enhancements," Drake challenged, though her voice lacked its former authority, "then they choose. That's the difference between your vision of progress and ours. We offer options. You demand compliance." Through her growing disorientation, Drake managed a bitter laugh. "You think this ends here? Nexus Dynamics has resources beyond your imagination, other facilities, other research. Teams. All of them received interesting tea packages this morning," a new voice interrupted. Victoria Chen stepped into the kitchen, her corporate appearance now more weapon than disguise. "Sophie sends her regards. Her Vancouver tea shop does a remarkable mail-order business." Drake's composure finally shattered. "Impossible. We monitored all potential corporate threats," Victoria finished, "but not small businesses, not community networks, not the quiet connections that exist outside your enhanced analytics." McTavish appeared next, his MI6 training allowing him to materialize like a shadow. Fascinating data coming in. Enhanced corporate teams worldwide experiencing mysterious system failures, legal documents becoming mysteriously corrupt. Enhancement. Research experiencing unexpected setbacks, almost like someone designed a virus that specifically targets corporate enhancement protocols, Victoria added with a small smile. Someone who understood both the chemistry and the corporate infrastructure supporting it. May continued her morning cooking preparations, her movements precise and unhurried despite the magnitude of what was unfolding. Sophie's original formula wasn't just about neutralizing physical enhancements. It was about breaking the systems that supported them, the corporate networks, the legal frameworks, the financial structures, all of them built on the same fundamental flaw. "What flaw?" Drake demanded, though her enhanced corporate authority was now little more than a memory. "The belief that humanity can be standardized, that progress can be forced, that community can be controlled." May began preparing the day's first batch of dumplings, the familiar routine, a counterpoint to the corporate empire crumbling around them. Real strength comes from diversity, from choice, from connections freely made and maintained. Through the window, Shadow Harbor continued its quiet revolution. Former enhanced agents were being welcomed into local shops, offering food and friendship rather than judgment. Corporate SUVs were being repurposed to deliver supplies and help neighbors. The very infrastructure of control was being transformed into a network of support. "What happens now?" Drake asked, her voice small and uncertain without its enhanced and confidence. "Now?" May shaped a dumpling with practiced care. "Now you have a choice. Stay. Experience what real community feels like. Learn why we fought so hard to protect it." She met Drake's eyes. "Or leave, knowing that your enhanced corporate empire was defeated not by violence or force, but by recipes and relationships." Victoria moved to secure the corporate documentation Drake had brought, while McTavish coordinated with Officer Zhang to manage the broader situation. But May's focus remained on her cooking, on the simple acts of creation and nurturing that had become Shadow Harbor's strongest defense. "Your tea," Drake said finally, scientific curiosity breaking through her. "Corporate conditioning. The formula. It shouldn't have been able to overcome our genetic coding, because your scientists approached it as a chemical equation," May replied, her quiet voice carrying the weight of generations of wisdom. "They never understood that some recipes are more than the sum of their ingredients. Some traditions carry power that can't be measured in laboratories." The morning sun had fully risen now, burning away the last of the mist to reveal Shadow Harbor in its true light. Not just a strategic port or corporate target, but a living community that had chosen to stand together. The enhanced corporate agents who had arrived as an invasion force were now being absorbed into the town's daily life, their artificial coordination replaced by genuine connection. Drake stood unsteadily, her enhanced capabilities now fully neutralized. You need to rest, May said gently. Mrs. Wong's congee is excellent for recovery, and Mr. Chen's tea shop offers a particularly good blend for clarity of thought. She paused, allowing a small smile. All natural. Of course, no enhancements needed. As the corporate CEO was led away by Dr. Martinez's capable team, May returned to her morning routine. The Golden Lotus would open on time, serving comfort and community to all who entered, former enemies included. You knew, Victoria said softly, watching her former protégé work. You knew Sophie's formula would do more than just neutralize their enhancements. You knew it would break their entire system. I knew people would choose connection over control, if given the chance. May began preparing the day's first orders, her quiet confidence filling the kitchen. The formula just helped them see the choice more clearly. Shadow Harbor had faced its moment of truth and emerged stronger, not through enhancement or force, but through the quiet strength of a community that understood some powers couldn't be synthesized, some bonds couldn't be enforced, and some cooks couldn't be corrupted. The revolution had begun with a cup of tea. It would continue with breakfast, served by a quiet cook who had learned that the most powerful changes often started with something as simple as sharing a meal and remembering who you really were. A week after Drake's attempted corporate takeover, Shadow Harbor had settled into a new rhythm. The Golden Lotus saw increased business as former enhanced agents discovered the simple pleasure of unmodified taste buds. Dr. Martinez's pharmacy became a rehabilitation center for those struggling with enhancement withdrawal. Even Mr. Chen's construction crew found themselves busy, helping former corporate operatives channel their residual enhanced strength into community projects. But May noticed the subtle signs that something larger was brewing. Her morning tea preparation was interrupted by McTavish's arrival, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Intelligence reports from 6 continents, he said without preamble, spreading satellite photos across her prep counter. Every major corporate headquarters that received Sophie's formula is being abandoned, but they're not shutting down. They're relocating. May studied the images while measuring tea leaves with precise care. The photos showed convoys of vehicles and equipment being moved to remote locations, far from populated areas. They're adapting. Worse. McTavish pulled up more images on his tablet. They're consolidating. Nexus Dynamics, Global Tech Securities, Mingzhou Enterprises. They're all converging on a single location, the Taklamakan Desert. Through her kitchen window, May watched 2 former enhanced agents helping Mrs. Wong set up her food cart. Their movements were less artificially precise now, more naturally fluid. The perfect place to rebuild their program, isolated, unmonitored, outside any single nation's jurisdiction. And beyond the reach of our distribution network, Victoria added, materializing from the shadows with her usual impeccable timing. They're learning from their mistakes. No more corporate facades, no more public presence. They're going completely dark. May's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared the morning's first dishes, but her mind raced through implications. They'll modify the enhancement formula, make it resistant to Sophie's counter-agent. They already have. Victoria placed a small vial on the counter, filled with an iridescent liquid that seemed to shift colors in the morning light. One of Drake's enhanced agents didn't fully revert. Our scientists found traces of this in his system. It's like nothing they've seen before. McTavish adjusted his glasses, studying the vial. Some kind of adaptive enhancement? Something that evolves. To resist countermeasures? More than that. Victoria's voice carried an edge of genuine concern. It's not just resistant, it's infectious. The enhanced agent was unconsciously affecting people around him. Subtle changes in behavior, coordination patterns, thought processes. A viral enhancement protocol, May realized, her knife pausing mid-slice, one that spreads through casual contact. The implications hung in the air like steam from her cooking pots, an enhancement formula that could spread naturally through population centers, gradually altering human consciousness without obvious signs. No need for corporate takeovers or legal maneuvering when the change could happen organically, invisibly. We recovered this message from Drake's secured files, Victoria continued, sliding a decoded transcript across the counter. It's from someone called the Director. No name, no identification, but definitely the one behind all of this. May read the message carefully, her expression unchanging but her grip tightening slightly on her knife. Initial setback anticipated. Shadow Harbor incident provides valuable data. Proceed with Phase 2. Enhancement through enlightenment. The quiet revolution begins. They're not just trying to enhance individuals anymore, McTavish realized. They're attempting to engineer the next step in human evolution. A worldwide transformation so subtle that people won't even realize it's happening. Through her window, May watched Shadow Harbor's morning routine unfold. Shopkeepers opening their stores, children heading to school, fishing boats setting out for the day's catch. None of them were aware that they had just become the front line in a war for humanity's future. "There's more," Victoria said quietly. "Sophie's gone dark. Her tea shop in Vancouver is empty. All her recent research, her notes on the counteragent. In formula, everything's been wiped, and she left this." She placed a single playing card on the counter, the Queen of Hearts, with a series of numbers written in Sophie's distinctive hand along its edges. Coordinates, McTavish identified immediately, leading to the Taklamakan Desert. "She's gone after them," May said, her soft voice carrying absolute certainty. "She's trying to stop this at the source." "Or she's been taken," Victoria countered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Either way, we can't let her face this alone. I'm assembling a team. Hayes and his people are already en route, with proper backup." "No." May's quiet voice cut through Victoria's planning. "A direct assault is exactly what they're expecting, probably what they're hoping for. The perfect justification for releasing their viral enhancement worldwide, protection against paramilitary threats." She moved to her spice rack, selecting certain rare ingredients with careful precision. "We need to approach this the way we protected Shadow Harbor. Not through force, but through—" She paused, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "Through recipe modification." McTavish frowned. "The desert is vast. Their facility will be heavily secured, even if we could get close enough to distribute. A counteragent— "We don't distribute it," May interrupted softly. "We let them distribute it themselves." Victoria's eyes widened as she caught on. "Use their own viral enhancement protocol as a delivery system. Turn their evolution virus into a carrier for Sophie's formula." "But modified," May continued, already beginning to measure ingredients. "Not to neutralize enhancement, but to restore choice. To make people consciously aware of the changes being attempted, able to accept or reject them freely." She opened her red notebook, turning to a section written in a complex cipher that combined chemical formulae with cooking instructions. "Sophie and I discussed this possibility in Hanoi. The ultimate counteragent wasn't about preventing enhancement. It was about preserving human agency, the right to choose who and what we become." Through her window, she watched a group of former enhanced agents sharing breakfast at Mrs. Wong's cart. their laughter completely natural now, their movements unsynchronized but genuine. They had chosen to stay in Shadow Harbor, to become part of the community they had once tried to control. It's elegant, McTavish admitted, but dangerous. If something goes wrong, if the formula isn't perfect, that's why I have to go alone, May said quietly, continuing her precise measurements. One quiet cook is easier to insert than a tactical team. And I know Sophie's methods, her way of thinking. When I find her, if you find her, Victoria corrected. When I find her, May repeated firmly, we'll need to work quickly. The viral enhancement protocol is designed to spread exponentially. Once they release it, how long do we have? McTavish asked. May's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she began preparing special ingredients for her journey. Based on those satellite photos, the facility will be operational within 72 hours. The viral protocol could begin, spreading immediately after that. 3 days to prevent forced human evolution, Victoria mused. And your plan is to walk into the most secure facility on Earth, find a possibly captured scientist, and modify a viral enhancement formula before it can be released. No, May corrected gently. My plan is to cook. She gestured to her kitchen, to the precise arrangements of ingredients and tools that had helped protect Shadow Harbor. Every recipe carries a history, a purpose, a piece of human culture that can't be enhanced or engineered. I'm going to remind them of that. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting Shadow Harbor in shades of gold and promise. In her kitchen, May Lean, former spy, current cook, and perpetual guardian of human choice, began preparing for her greatest challenge. The quiet revolution was indeed beginning, but not the one the director had planned. This revolution would be carried in recipes passed down through generations, in traditions that valued individual choice over enforced evolution, and in the subtle strength of a cook who understood that the most powerful transformations always began in the quietest ways. As she packed her essential tools and ingredients, May allowed herself a small smile. They thought they were engineering humanity's next step. They were about to learn that true evolution couldn't be forced. It had to be chosen, one recipe at a time. You'll need help, a new voice interrupted. Officer Zhang stood in the kitchen doorway, his uniform crisp but his expression troubled, at least with the local authorities in the region. He's right, McTavish added. The Taklamakan isn't just remote, it's actively patrolled. Chinese military, regional security forces, private contractors, all of them potentially compromised, Victoria finished. If the viral enhancement is already being tested. May's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she selected specific spices, each one chosen not just for its culinary properties but for its potential chemical interactions. That's exactly why I need to go alone. Large movements draw attention, but one cook traveling to study regional cuisine would draw no attention at all, a gravelly voice completed. Mr. Chen emerged from the shadows of the back entrance, moving with the fluid grace that had nothing to do with enhancement and everything to do with decades of disciplined practice. Especially if she were part of a legitimate cultural exchange program. He placed a thick envelope on her prep counter. Inside were perfectly forged documents identifying May as part of an international culinary research project, complete with official stamps and digital credentials. My former profession left me with certain contacts, the elderly man explained, answering the unspoken question, some of whom owe me favors from before I found peace here in Shadow Harbor. Through her window, May watched as more of her allies gathered, Dr. Martinez reviewing medical data on the viral enhancement, Mrs. Wong coordinating with her vast network of food vendors, and Hayes's team establishing secure communication protocols. Each of them brings their unique skills to support her mission while maintaining their cover as ordinary community members. The director's message mentions enhancement through enlightenment, McTavish mused, studying the decoded transcript again. It's an interesting choice of words, almost religious. Or philosophical, Victoria added. The idea that enhanced consciousness leads to enhanced evolution, that by altering how people think, you can guide how they develop. Me reached for her red notebook, turning to a section written in Sophie's most complex cipher. That's what makes their viral protocol so dangerous. It's not just about physical enhancement anymore. They're trying to change how humanity perceives itself, its potential, its future, and they're using the desert to test it, Officer Zhang realized. A controlled environment, isolated populations, minimal outside contact, the perfect laboratory, Victoria confirmed grimly. And if Sophie's been captured, her expertise in neurochemical programming could be the key they need to perfect the formula. Mr. Chen moved to May's spice rack, his experienced eyes evaluating her selections. You'll need more than just counter-agents, he said quietly. The desert has its own rules, its own wisdom. The local peoples have traditions that have helped them survive there for thousands of years. He reached into his worn jacket, producing a small package wrapped in aged silk. From my grandmother's collection. Desert sage, sand ginger, cave-aged oolong, ingredients that understand the harsh truths of that environment. May accepted the package with proper reverence, recognizing the value of such carefully preserved treasures. Thank you, Sifu. The old man's eyes crinkled with subtle humor, just a retired cook sharing recipes with a colleague. Dr. Martinez approached next, carrying a medical kit disguised as a traditional herb collection. The viral enhancement works by altering neural pathways, she explained, showing May specific compounds. But it also affects the endocrine system, subtle changes in hormone production that make people more susceptible to collective influence. Like a chemical form of social media, McTavish noted, making people more connected, more aligned with a group consciousness, more controllable, Victoria finished. A population that thinks it's achieving enlightenment while actually surrendering individual agency. May studied the medical data while preparing a test batch of specially modified tea. The complexity of what they faced was staggering, a threat that couldn't be fought with weapons or tactics, but had to be countered on a molecular level, one person at a time. There's something else, Officer Zhang said, his voice dropping lower. Reports from the border regions near the desert. People gather in strange patterns, moving with unusual coordination, and they're cooking. Cooking? McTavish frowned. Community kitchens, food-sharing programs, collective dining experiences, Zhang elaborated, all promoting a philosophy of unity through shared consumption, like they're preparing the population for something, for viral enhancement through shared meals, May realized. They're using the most basic human connection, breaking bread together, as a delivery system for their evolution protocol. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The same community traditions that had helped Shadow Harbor resist corporate control were being weaponized to spread a different kind of influence. You'll need this, Victoria said, placing a small device on the counter. It looked like a normal cooking thermometer, but contained sophisticated chemical analysis capabilities. It can detect trace amounts of the viral enhancement in food and water sources. Sophie developed it before she disappeared. May tested the device on her modified tea, watching as it displayed complex molecular structures and potential interaction patterns. She knew, she said softly. She knew they'd try something like this. That's why she went dark, to draw them out, to find their main facility. To give us a chance to stop them, Victoria agreed. But she couldn't have known about the desert facility, about how far they've advanced the viral protocol. If they catch her, they won't, May replied with quiet certainty. She began packing her selected tools and ingredients with precise care, each item chosen for multiple potential uses. Because they'll be too busy dealing with an unassuming cook who just wants to learn about regional cuisine. Through her window, the morning sun illuminated Shadow Harbor in its full vitality, a community that had chosen to resist enhancement, not through force or control, but through genuine connection and preserved traditions. Soon she would leave this haven to venture into the desert, carrying their strength with her in carefully measured ingredients and precisely recorded recipes. 3 days, McTavish reminded her, before the facility is fully operational. Before they think they're fully operational, May corrected gently. She sealed her traveling spice kit, each compartment containing compounds that could detect, analyze, or counter the viral enhancement protocol. Some recipes take time to properly develop. Rushing them... A ghost of a smile touched her lips. That would be their second mistake. And their first? Officer Zhang asked. May looked around her kitchen at the allies who had gathered to support her mission while maintaining their cover as ordinary community members. At the tools and ingredients that had helped protect Shadow Harbor, now prepared for a greater challenge. In the morning sun, painting everything in shades of possibility and promise. Their first mistake, she said softly, was forgetting that. True evolution comes from wisdom preserved, not power imposed, from choices offered, not changes forced. She secured her red notebook, Sophie's legacy of resistance encoded in its pages. They tried to enhance humanity without understanding what makes us human. As her allies dispersed to their respective roles, maintaining Shadow Harbor's defenses while supporting her desert mission, May completed her preparations with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every task. Soon, she would venture into the harsh environment of the Taklamakan, facing an enemy that thought it could control human evolution through viral enhancement and collective consciousness. They would learn, as others had before them, that the most powerful forces weren't always the most obvious ones. That true change couldn't be engineered or enforced. That sometimes the greatest resistance came not from weapons of warfare, but from a quiet cook carrying ancient wisdom in carefully measured ingredients and precisely preserved traditions. The next step in human evolution was indeed approaching, but it would come not through viral enhancement or forced enlightenment, but through the simple act of people choosing their own path, preserving their own traditions, and sharing their own recipes for the future they wish to create. Meilin, former spy and current guardian of human choice, was ready to remind them of that truth, one carefully prepared meal at a time. 6 months after the Taklamakan mission, the Golden Lotus hummed with its usual morning activity. Steam rose from cooking pots, carrying the complex aromas of May's special blends into the crisp harbor air. Through her kitchen window, she could see Shadow Harbor going about its daily routine, though now with subtle differences that only the most observant might notice. Former enhanced agents had fully integrated into the community, their artificial, a coordination replaced by natural rhythms. Officer Zhang's police force had evolved into something more like community guides than law enforcement. Even the corporate buildings had been repurposed into cultural centers and communal spaces. But it was the quiet figure sitting at her corner table that truly marked how much had changed. Sophie Chen, no longer in hiding, sipped her morning tea while reviewing scientific journals on her tablet. "The latest results are fascinating," Sophie said, as May brought her a fresh pot of oolong. "The viral enhancement protocol, modified by your dessert recipe variations, is showing exactly the effects we hope for." May's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared the morning's first dumplings. Conscious awareness rather than forced evolution. More than that. Sophie's eyes sparkled with scientific enthusiasm. The neural pathway modifications are actually enhancing individual choice rather than collective control. People are becoming more aware of their own potential while maintaining their cultural connections. Through the window, they could see Dr. Martinez consulting with a group that included both locals and former enhanced operatives, all of them sharing their experiences with the modified formula. The virus had spread exactly as the director had planned, but its effects were dramatically different from what was intended. They never understood the desert, May said quietly, her mind traveling back to those crucial days in the Taklamakan. How it teaches the difference between surviving through control and thriving through adaptation. The mission had seemed impossible. At first, infiltrating a heavily secured facility, finding Sophie, and modifying a viral enhancement protocol before it could be released worldwide. But May had learned long ago that the most effective approaches were often the most subtle ones. She had arrived as exactly what she claimed to be, a cook studying regional cuisine. Her cultural exchange credentials provided by Mr. Chen's contacts had granted her access to local communities already being affected by test releases of the viral enhancement. Your insight about the desert traditions was crucial, Sophie acknowledged. Using their own food-sharing programs to distribute the modified formula, incorporating local wisdom about survival and community. While you reprogrammed their delivery, systems from the inside, May completed. She had found Sophie not as a captive, but as a carefully placed infiltrator, working to understand and modify the enhancement virus at its source. The director's facility had been a marvel of modern engineering, rising from the desert sands. But its designers had made the same mistake as Way and Drake, assuming that control was stronger than choice, that forced evolution was superior to natural adaptation. They hadn't expected their viral enhancement program to be modified by ancient desert wisdom, carried in carefully preserved recipes and traditions. They hadn't anticipated that their forced enlightenment protocol could be transformed into a catalyst for genuine human growth. Victoria's report came in this morning, Sophie said, switching to a secure channel on her tablet. The director's backup facilities have all been identified. It seems our modified virus spread through their own secure networks, affecting their enhanced operatives exactly as designed. Mie allowed herself a small smile as she continued her precise knife work, making them aware of their conditioning, giving them the choice to maintain or reject artificial enhancement. Most are choosing to join communities like Shadow Harbor, Sophie confirmed. Places that understand the balance between progress and tradition, between individual growth and collective support. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting the harbor in shades of possibility. Through her window, May could see McTavish deep in conversation with Mr. Chen, the MI6 agent having found unexpected wisdom in the elderly man's carefully preserved traditions. Hayes and his team had established a training center that combined military discipline with community service, teaching former enhanced operatives how to use their residual capabilities for constructive purposes. Even Drake had found a new purpose, working with Dr. Martinez to help others transition from enhancement dependency to natural growth. The director is still out there, Sophie noted, a touch of concern in her voice. Already gathering resources, planning new approaches to human evolution. Let them plan, May replied softly. She reached for her red notebook, no longer a simple recipe collection, but a growing compendium of wisdom, combining Sophie's science with traditional knowledge from cultures around the world. They'll never understand that true evolution can't be forced or controlled. Her kitchen had become more than just a restaurant's heart. It was now a subtle command center for a different kind of revolution, one that spread not through force or viral enhancement, but through shared meals and preserved traditions. Each morning, carefully prepared packages left the Golden Lotus, carrying modified ingredients to communities worldwide. Each one contained not just Sophie's adapted formula, but something more powerful, Recipes that preserved cultural wisdom, that promoted genuine connection, that offered choices rather than demanded compliance. "We're getting more requests," Sophie said, checking her tablet again. "Communities asking for help, establishing their own protection networks. Former enhanced operatives looking for alternatives to corporate control. Even some governments are quietly seeking ways to resist forced evolution programs." "They'll all receive the same answer," May replied, her quiet voice carrying absolute certainty. She gestured to her kitchen, where centuries of cultural wisdom were preserved in careful measurements and precise techniques. "The power they seek isn't in enhancement or control. It's in remembering who they are, in choosing who they wish to become." Through her window, Shadow Harbor continued its daily dance of community and commerce. Mrs. Wong's food cart network had expanded, now carrying not just meals, but messages of resistance through carefully preserved traditions. Mr. Chen's construction projects incorporated ancient wisdom about sustainable growth and natural harmony. The viral enhancement protocol, originally designed to force humanity's evolution, had been transformed into something else entirely. A catalyst for conscious choice, for genuine growth, for the kind of progress that couldn't be engineered or enforced. They never saw it coming, Sophie mused, watching the community's natural rhythms unfold. How something as simple as cooking could defeat their most advanced evolutionary programming. May's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared another batch of her special tea blend, because they forgot what makes us human, not our capability for enhancement, but our capacity for choice. Not our potential for controlled evolution, but our power to preserve wisdom and share understanding. The morning light caught the steam rising from her cooking pots, creating halos that seemed to dance in the air. To most observers, it was just another day at the Golden Lotus, but to those who knew where to look, it was the heart of a quiet revolution that had already changed the world. A revolution that continued with each meal served, each recipe shared, each tradition preserved and passed down. A revolution guided not by viral enhancement or corporate control, but by the simple truth that the strongest changes were often the quietest ones. "More tea," May offered Sophie, who nodded gratefully as she poured the carefully prepared blend. May Lin, former spy, current cook, and perpetual guardian of human choice, allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The director and others like them would keep trying to force humanity's evolution, to control its development through ever more sophisticated means. But they would always fail because they could never grasp the simple truth that Shadow Harbor had learned, that true power lay not in forcing change, but in preserving wisdom, not in controlling growth, but in offering choices, not in engineering evolution, but in remembering who we are and choosing who we wish to become. The quiet revolution would continue, one carefully prepared meal at a time, and May would be there, in her kitchen, showing the world that sometimes the most powerful weapons weren't weapons at all. They were recipes, passed down through generations, carrying the wisdom of ages in every carefully measured ingredient. The morning sun painted Shadow Harbor in shades of promise as another day began, and in the Golden Lotus's kitchen, steam continued to rise from cooking pots like incense from an ancient altar, carrying with it the subtle strength of a revolution that had already won, not through force or enhancement, but through the quiet power of a cook who understood that true evolution always began with choice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.